Good morning, and welcome back to UCI Mind's monthly Facebook Live series, Ask the Doc, Alzheimer's Research Today. This is episode 7 of our series, and today we're going to be discussing brain scans and how they can be used to identify Alzheimer's disease. I'm Chelsea Cox, your host for this series and the Associate Director of Education for UCI Mind, which is one of 32 congressionally designated Alzheimer's disease research centers across the country, and the only center right here in Orange County on UC Irvine campus. We are a collection of over 100 faculty, staff, and trainees who really dedicated their lives to solving Alzheimer's disease. And in this series, we aim to bring our experts to you to discuss the latest advances in Alzheimer's research and to answer your questions. And today, I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. Craig Stark. Welcome, Dr. Stark. And just to briefly introduce Dr. Stark, he earned his PhD in cognitive psychology from Carnegie Mellon University in Pennsylvania. He's currently a professor of neurobiology and behavior in the UCI School of Biological Sciences, and he serves as the director for the Campus Center for Neuroimaging and the Facility for Imaging and Brain Research, or FIBRE. Dr. Stark's research utilizes brain imaging and experimental psychology to increase understanding of long-term memory in humans, in particular people with age-related brain diseases like Alzheimer's. So, Dr. Stark, thank you for joining us live today to answer some questions about brain imaging and how it relates to Alzheimer's disease and how it can be used to better understand the disease. And thank you to all of you who are attending live right now. If this is your first Facebook Live series for our Ask the Doc, how this works is I'll get things started by asking Dr. Stark a few questions, and then please, as your questions come up, go ahead and type them there in the comments box on your screen, and we will try to address as many as we can. And please do remember that whatever you type will be linked to your name and visible to others. So please post responsibly, okay? So Dr. Stark, to begin, it'd be helpful, I think, for our viewers to have a little bit of background on brain imaging. Mm-hmm. So first, what is an MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging?
Yeah, so an MRI is one kind of scan that we often do, and a number of people out there watching may have actually had an MRI before, whether it's for your brain or, for example, if you've fallen and you've twisted your ankle or something like this, and they want to get a good picture inside to see what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And so it's a machine, it's a tube you lie in with a huge magnetic field, and somehow we can actually take a picture of what the inside of your body looks like using these magnets. It's great, it's non-invasive, it doesn't hurt, there's no radiation or anything like that associated with it, so you can do it over and over and over again. I've had hundreds of them, and this happened before any of that. So it's a perfectly sort of safe kind of way of looking inside of your body.
Okay. And then another imaging tool that can be used for Alzheimer's disease is PET scans. Tell us what a PET scan is.
Yeah, so a PET scan, a lot of similarities in that, again, you're going to be lying inside of a tube. The difference in a PET scan here is that for a PET scan to actually work, we have to inject you with something that's mildly radioactive.
Okay.
And the downside of that, of course, is that we're injecting you with something that's mildly radioactive. Yeah. But the neat thing about a PET scan is that we can tailor exactly what we're injecting in you to be able to highlight specific things inside of your body, inside of your brain in this case here. So if we want to get an image to see how much dopamine there is in your brain or how much your brain metabolism is functioning, this kind of thing, we'll inject different radioactive tracers in there to really bind onto those specific compounds to get a good image of exactly what that looks like. So it can be very nice and specific.
All right, and you talked a little bit about magnets being used in MRI and radiation being used in PET scans. Are there any potential side effects of either of these scans?
Yeah, so with MRI, there are no known side effects.
Okay.
They have raised animals inside of very high strength MR scanners for a long time, and as long as you are MR safe, meaning that you don't have any ferrous metal inside of your body that could move or heat up or something like that, it's fine. I it's a stressful environment for many people. You're lying inside of a tube, and if you're at all claustrophobic, and it's noisy and that sort of thing, but there aren't those downsides to it. You can do it as many times as you want. There are even people doing it here at UCI. There are people who will look at somebody, when a woman, when she's pregnant, take an image of her and take an image of the environment that actually the fetus is developing in, and take an image of the fetus then to try to predict what's going to happen to that child during development and how cognitive development is going to go on. So they'll then scan the child as well later on. So very, very nice that way. On a PET scan, we are injecting you with a radioactive isotope, and it's more than you're going to get in a chest X-ray or something like this. It's typically a couple years worth of the typical dose that you would have just by, living your natural life. It's adding that into you. So you can do those kinds of things much less frequently.
Okay. Now, are there any other scans that might be relevant to Alzheimer's disease research that we should know about?
Yeah, those really are the two main ones. There are other ways we can look inside your brain and see how it's functioning. We can put electrodes on your scalp and take a look at the electrical activity. And that has had some uses in Alzheimer's. That's used a lot in experimental psychology to figure out exactly how dynamics of brain activity are working.
Is that an EEG?
That's an EEG, exactly, yes. And there are, there's near infrared we can peer inside, and you can do MEG. There are a lot of ways we can look inside, but for Alzheimer's disease, really the two leaders by far are MRI and PET.
Okay. So so you mentioned that those scans can be used to look at Alzheimer's disease. Are they used to diagnose the disease itself?
Exactly.
And when doctors do order them, what exactly are they looking for? And can they provide a definitive diagnosis for a person?
Yeah. So we're moving as a field, we're moving really toward being able to diagnose Alzheimer's disease based on biomarkers, in particular, really very often based on neuroimaging. So very recently, there's been a new way of thinking about this, and to try to get this diagnosis as something that we can do off of imaging, and it's called the ATN framework.
Okay.
So trying to have brain scans or other ways of getting at how much amyloid does somebody have in their brain. So amyloid beta, one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, that's the A. T, that's the tau, one of the other classic hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And then the last one, N, is neurodegeneration.
Okay.
So has your brain or specific portions of your brain, like the hippocampus, have they shrunk more than one would actually expect? And so right now there's a lot of work going on to try to take this ATN framework. We know if you're positive on each of those, that is a very, very strong indicator of Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. And
now a lot of the work that's going on is to figure out, well, what if you're positive on 2 out of the 3 of them, and exactly what's the staging of them? And there's a lot that's going on there. So right now, doctors will use a brain scan. They'll often get an MRI. It's a lot less expensive than a PET scan, to then try to see, for example, is there something else that might be causing the cognitive impairment somebody is suffering from.
Okay.
And so they could use that to rule out, and they can see, does it start to look like Alzheimer's disease? It's being used a lot in research for it. In clinical practice, it's certainly used to rule other things out, and more and more we're getting to the point at which we're going to be using that as a clear diagnosis.
What might an MRI be used to rule out?
So there are a lot of kinds of dementia. So for example, one of them is vascular dementia. Okay. So in vascular dementia is really a series of small strokes that lead to clots in the brain or blockages of blood flow in some way that lead to a widespread diffuse damage. Alzheimer's disease also leads to a widespread diffuse damage in your brain. But the exact mechanism of them is different. Okay. And we can often see those kinds of things on an MRI scan, or frontotemporal dementia, in which really it's just your frontal lobe and your temporal lobe that are having issues. If you see that kind of pattern, then you know it's that form of dementia instead of Alzheimer's disease.
And are PET scans often used in clinic settings to help with diagnosis?
PET scans certainly can be, and they can be very informative on that because of that specificity. We have PET tracers, they're called, in which if it's injected, we can get an image actually of the amount of amyloid beta that's in your brain. We can get an image of the amount of tau, those neurofibrillary tau tangles that are in your brain. And those then are the underlying hallmarks of, biological hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And so they're getting to be more and more of a way in which people can use that for diagnosis.
Okay. Now, if you're just joining us, just as a reminder, as you have questions that come up for Dr. Stark, you can go ahead and type them in the comments box, and we will address as many questions as we can. We just talked a little bit about how PET scans are used in a clinic setting to aid a clinician in diagnosis. Dr. Stark, how is imaging used in research, in Alzheimer's research, in animal models and in humans? Yeah,
so I mean, let's take that amyloid beta and tau. I was just at a conference just a couple of weeks or so ago up in Los Angeles, the big international conference on Alzheimer's disease. And one of the big things that researchers want to nail down is, when do we start seeing some of these earliest signs? Cognitively, you may be doing just fine, or maybe you're having a little bit of an impairment, but it's too subtle to really pick up, certainly on a lot of the kinds of tests that we use. But something's going on inside your brain. When does that happen? Which one comes in first? So does the amyloid beta come in first? And can we see people in which there is amyloid, a high amyloid load early on in life that may be predictive of transitioning to Alzheimer's later on? So by virtue of being able to peer inside the brain and get an image of this without hurting the person here, we can get an image of this. We can then track and see how well this is actually working. Or if we have a treatment, let's say we have something, and there are things that can clear out amyloid. So there are a number of clinical trials, like the A4 trial going on, in which they're looking at people who are at a particularly high risk. And one of those risks could be you have an amyloid positive scan. So in any case, as they're doing a treatment and they're looking, hey, is your memory, is your cognition getting any better? They're also able to see, is the brain actually changing? Are they effectively clearing that kind of thing? So we use it a lot for that. We use it a lot for, who should we be studying? So if I've got some idea as to something that may actually be able to really slow down Alzheimer's disease, I'm going to want to do it in people who actually have early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Maybe not even, so much that it's progressed into something that it's a problem yet. You don't want to stop somebody at a spot where they have a real problem. You'd like to do it earlier. But how do we know? How do we know whether it's a typical kind of aging or whether it's a dementia? And so brain scans here, or cerebral spinal fluid analysis, and this kind of thing really gives us a way to be a lot more confident that this participant here is much more likely to be suffering from or in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. And that person over there, maybe not. It's a different kind of thing. So if any treatment I may have would be for Alzheimer's, I'll give it to this person, not to that person.
And you use the term early stages of Alzheimer's disease. What exactly do you mean by that? Are you talking about people before they ever show symptoms? Or
yeah. So we know that some number of us are going to end up with this. And we know that some number of us will be able to live into our 90s or even our hundreds and be perfectly fine. So we don't seem to all get it, at least within the typical human lifespan here. And so we want to then be able to trace back as the amyloid is starting to build up, as the tau is starting to build up, as this is starting to lead to very, very small changes inside the brain, so small that you may not really be detecting any problems yet. Don't have any changes in your memory, don't have any changes in your mood, don't have any of these other kinds of things. We want to be able to, though, see that, wait a minute, something has been going on behind the scenes. Look, when I'm about to hop on a plane later on today, and I'm going to be exposed to all sorts of germs, and maybe one of them is going to get me sick. So, but that germ will have hit me, and I will start to have some reaction in my body that's a result of this before, the nose goes and the eyes are itching and all that kind of thing, and I start to feel I have it. So if I can get to it beforehand here, that's going to be vital.
Okay. It looks like we have some questions from our viewers here. One of the questions, let's see here, mentioned that we see news all the time about new studies which show the potential to diagnose Alzheimer's? For example, measuring amyloid and tau. What types of large studies are still needed before we could actually diagnose the disease? And when do you realistically think these studies will be complete? So that's the first part of the question.
Yeah.
And then there's a follow-up. Aside from the diagnostics, what is remaining before we can assess risk of developing Alzheimer's and employ strategies to prevent, such as diet, lifestyle changes, or drugs?
Yeah, so there are a lot of great bits inside of that. And one of them, the key one initial key I want to bring out here is that in Notion we see all the time, oh, here's this new thing. And sometimes it's a diagnostic, sometimes it's a treatment or something like this. And it'll be based on one small study, or maybe there have been a couple and that sort of thing. And in all of these, one study is just one study. And in science, we need to replicate, we need to expand to the larger trials and that sort of thing. So for everybody else out there, the person asking the question here is already at this point of realizing you should maybe get a little excited about one study, but not, in some ways, the proverbial bet the farm, on it just yet here. And so that's one of the key take homes really for everybody. You see something in the news, that's great. It shows people are working, people are trying new ideas and that kind of thing, but it's not an established fact yet. So in terms of what needs to happen and are these going on, this is very, very much going on. I mean, this is something that is an astoundingly active line of research. As right now, I mean, for example, people at that conference I was just at were talking about, okay, here are some different kinds of PET ligands. Here's how we might be able to infer a PET diagnosis here based on MRI and some behavioral bits, et cetera. So there's a huge amount of this going on, and there are very large-scale samples and trials going on. So for a long time, there's been Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging initiative, in which Alzheimer's centers across the globe really have been collecting very standardized kinds of images for researchers then to be able to use and mine. And when done correctly, for example, you grab a portion of the data, you try your neat little technique to do, determine how well can I detect if this is Alzheimer's or not. And then you go and you test it on another set that you hadn't looked at yet. We can do these kinds of things now because the field has come together to be able to actually pool our data, have common tools, have common images to be able to do that sort of thing. So a lot of that is absolutely ongoing right now. And then the last bit here was, before we can really get at the risks. So the risks, then you need to know something about the outcome state. And the sooner you can know about that outcome state, the better you can actually get at those risks. Because look, if Alzheimer's disease has been going on in somebody for 10, 20 years before they're really showing outward signs that we say there's a problem, that then means that anything that we try to look back and look at the risks on, we're going back a long way. And there was a lot that could have been going on in that time that could have been speeding it up, could have been slowing it down, could have been inducing it. And that's a really, really tough kind of problem. And also it means then that any notion of a treatment we have is always, 10, 20 years away? So I mean, if I have some great thing and I do it to you now and I've got to wait 20 years to figure out, did it work? That's a tough way to do science. Yeah. One reason we turn to animal models for that kind of thing, but also that's another reason why we want to be able to use things like neuroimaging as a much better diagnostic tool to be able to see before you're showing signs, hey, wait a minute, you probably are going to have a problem, or to be able to track the progression of the disease or a treatment there. And as we get to tighten that time loop by having it be much shorter by using neuroimaging here, that's then where we can get a much better idea as to what the risk factors are and how well we can actually move this around. So let's take diet or exercise. Does it have an effect? Okay, it's tough to get people to stick onto an exercise regime or a diet for 10, 20 years that they weren't already going to do. Ask any cardiovascular doctor, any heart doctor here who's been telling you this for the last 50 years or something like this, exercise more and eat better. It's a tough thing to get us to do. Yeah. If we could actually see that truly we can point to things, yeah, this is changing the risk. It is changing the progression of this, that'd be a lot, stronger selling point.
Yeah. Another question we have here is how are machine learning data analytics being used to predict diagnosis?
Yeah, so machine learning is a phenomenal tool, and actually way back when I was at Carnegie Mellon, that's really what I was doing in my PhD. It was neural network, the early days of machine learning, and it's a phenomenal kind of technique that can be used to pick up regularities in the data that really aren't necessarily visible to the naked eye, and can also speed things up remarkably. So, for example, we have a center here at UCI for using artificial intelligence in medical imaging. And one of the things that they're doing, they can train up machine learning techniques to look for tumors and do it as well, if not better, than a physician can. And right now, we're working with them on using it to be able to segment out different regions of the brain almost instantaneously, whereas our existing tools can take a day to go and process through all of the data to come up with that. One of the challenges with machine learning, though, is that you need a lot of data. I can't do an initial kind of study and say, hey, I have 20 people who are in early Alzheimer's disease and 30 or 40 who are healthy volunteers, and let me use machine learning to figure out the differences between them. I mean, you can run it, but it's not actually going to work well at all. You need data sets in the thousands and everything for them to be able to actually work well. So that's something that, as there are these new initiatives where we're getting more and more data, will get to be more and more of an option for us. But at the moment here for this, it's a little tougher, on that.
Okay. Another question we have here is, would imaging be able to detect early onset Alzheimer's disease? And is there a reason why there's more and more early onset Alzheimer's disease, even as early as the age of 35?
Yeah, so early onset Alzheimer's is driven far more by known genes.
Okay.
So we know that there are genetic, risk factors and everything to the typical late onset Alzheimer's in your 70s and 80s and that sort of thing. For the aggressive early onset ones, your presenilin 1 and 2, your APPs, these genes, we know that if you have these and they will then run in certain families, you will almost certainly be getting Alzheimer's disease at an early age. So with that, you certainly can use neuroimaging on them to be able to go and actually take a look at the progression of it. And there are studies going on actually with that. But it's also something that with the genetic tests and everything that we have, we can do a really good job of seeing, are you, highly at risk and everything for that. And in terms of the occurrence of it, one of the things that has been very interesting for researchers is to be able to see folks who are actually having this very aggressive form, again, sort of helps us as researchers tighten up that loop. It also pulls typical aging out of it. And so it's been a very important area that researchers have used, and that's actually been the source for the things like the mouse models of Alzheimer's disease. It's those same genes in this early aggressive Alzheimer's that have been used in almost all of the mouse models. I don't know that it's actually getting any higher incidence over time, because we have to pull that out from people looking for it more. And so as we're looking for something, we have a greater chance of being able to find it. And so as there's been more and more of a, research in terms of interest in terms of research for working with these families who are these carriers, we've got to see more and more of them actually about.
And this is a very small minority.
Exactly. And this is not then your classic of, grandma or grandpa is having real trouble now, because as the question noted, this is happening in your 30s and 40s.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is, what is the typical cost of MRI and PET scans for patients? Is it typically covered by health insurance? And any thoughts on the most economical way to do an MRI or PET scan?
Yeah. So like everything in medicine, the cost to the patient will range anywhere from pretty much nothing to insanely expensive. So I can't give an actual quote in terms of what it is to a patient there. I mean, I can say for research purposes at our MR center here, it's $565 an hour. You can hop online and see those rates and everything yourself there. And that's what it costs researchers to be able to use the facility. That doesn't include diagnostic reads or anything like that. That's just time on the magnet. And, your PET scans, you're talking on average about 3 times, that sort of cost. So PET scans are a lot more expensive than MR. Some of that just comes down to the economics of how many people you can push through the machine, the fact that we have to synthesize these very, very specific radioactive isotopes, which require cyclotrons and all sorts of stuff to actually create. And so there's a lot more than that goes along, with actually having one of those. So then in terms of, is it used for, in diagnostic purposes, can these expenses be covered? Certainly MR is done for that a lot of times. And so a lot of the people in the ADRC who are participating as volunteers in the ADRC will have had MR scans done in a clinical environment that we can actually start using for research as well, but that it has been used in the process of their diagnosis.
Okay. These are great questions, and I just want to learn a little bit more about the research that you're currently doing. So how are you using brain imaging in your lab to better understand Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah. So in my lab for a long time, we've been trying to figure out basic questions on how does memory work? Mm-hmm. How does it change with age? And how is the aging different from Alzheimer's disease? So for example, could we, in any of our imaging work, in any of our cognitive behavioral work, could we do anything that would help us tell who is perhaps going to be at the earliest stages or who might be more at risk for it? Mm-hmm. And so we've done most of my work has been with MRI. So that's the sticking people inside the big magnet. Mm-hmm. And in MRI, there are a lot of techniques out there. MR is an incredibly versatile tool. We can get pictures of what's the size and shape. And it turns out that the size and shape of the hippocampus is actually somewhat predictive of progression into Alzheimer's disease. We can get images of the activity and the sort of network of activity, how different portions of the brain are talking to each other. And it turns out that those networks are differing as you start to slide into dementia. And that can be used as a test for as some way of helping to confer a diagnosis or to inform Alzheimer's disease. And recently, we've been turning back to what actually was one of the original forms of MR. It's called MR spectroscopy, and it lets you really look at the underlying chemicals inside your brain. So things like glutamate and glutamine and GABA and different neurotransmitters like this, or markers of cellular integrity or markers of inflammation, myoinositol and other actual metabolites in your brain. We're turning to this to be able to get a richer, more neurobiological sort of understanding of exactly what's going on in early stages of Alzheimer's disease and how that may differ from typical aging. Again, with this notion of what can we do to try to have early detection, be monitoring disease progression, and really be also then tying that with what's going on with your memory. Because I've been a memory researcher now for a good long time, and can we actually even come up with better tests that your clinician may even be able to use, ones that are more sensitive to something like this. Because it's great to be able to have an image of your brain, and it's great to be able to see what's going on inside there. But as one of the questioners noted, they're expensive.
Yeah.
If I can give you a 5-minute behavioral test that at least is going to say, you know what, I know you think you're having problems, but trust me, you're actually fine here. Mm-hmm. If I could do something like that, that could actually be deployed to clinicians. That could be done very, very quickly in an incredibly cost-effective way, and then filter who should maybe be followed up with a brain scan. So we do a lot of that kind of work too.
Wow, that is incredibly fascinating work that you're doing, so important to the field. And you are a wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And thank you for the questions.
Yes, thank you to all the viewers who attended live today. If you want to learn more about Dr. Stark's research or about UCI Mind, you can visit our website at mind.uci.edu, and Kirsten will go ahead and post that in the comments box there. If you're interested in participating in research at UCI and helping researchers like Dr. Stark answer some of these important questions to bring us closer to improved treatments and understanding of the causes of these types of diseases like Alzheimer's, you can visit the Consent-to-Contact Registry website, which is c2c.uci.edu. And I just want to let everyone know that registration is now open for UCI Mind and Alzheimer's Orange County's 30th Annual Southern California Alzheimer's Disease Research Conference. So that will be held on October 25th at the Irvine Marriott. And if you'd like to learn more and register, you can visit conference.mind.uci.edu. So thank you again for attending. I hope that you will join me next month on September 6th. It's the first Friday of the month. I will be joined by Dr. Ed Nanuki, who will talk about what we have learned from brain donations from research participants. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.